B2B marketers, welcome to B2 Beacon's first installment of our Leadership and Luminaries series. We are here in the lovely city of Chicago, which happens to be host to the largest and most respected B2B marketing association and event in the world. I'm your host, Thad Kalo, CEO of Business Online and executive editor of B2 Beacon. And I have the pleasure today to introduce Jeffrey Hayzlett, who is the co-host and chief editor of C-Suite. Jeff, you need no introduction, but please.
That was pretty good. Actually, not co-host, the only host.
The only host.
There's no freaking
Well,
other
maybe I
host
hope
on
I
this
can
show.
angle my way in there to host with you.
It ain't going to happen. I own the show, so it isn't going to happen. I can tell you that
All right,
right
fantastic.
now. Yeah, the host of the C-Suite, which is on Bloomberg. It's the #1 primetime business show on television today. And then also we're kicking it online as well. So we do about 40 to 50 times more online views than any other show. So it's been a very well-received show.
So wow, this is actually a bigger honor than I actually originally anticipated.
Well,
so thanks for making it, Jeff.
This. I get interviewed by somebody else for a change. Put me on the hot seat.
Okay, here we go.
All right.
So the premise is this. We believe that sales have been hailed as rainmakers. Product engineering, they're the geniuses behind product. Yet marketers, specifically B2B marketers, are the conduit, the introduction, enabler, and insights into the most valuable asset any company has, the customer relationship. Why is it taking companies so long to understand that paradigm shift, if you will? And do you believe in that premise, Jeff?
Well, a little bit of the premise. I don't know if I believe the whole thing. I think everyone's responsible for the customer relationship. I think when you look at marketing, I believe it's the inception of the idea all the way through customer satisfaction, and we own that process. And I think that's what we really own, and we own the promise back to the customer, and that's really the brand, and that's what the brand becomes, is that promise. Now, in that process, though, there are lots of other people who believe they own things along the way, and therein lies the issue. Whether it's the CEO, the chief sales officer, chief revenue officer, in some cases even the chief information officer for that matter. But everyone believes they own a piece of that. And
Sure.
That's what's really tough about, the marketing side. And everyone believes that they understand what marketing is in one way or another, and they usually don't. They think marketing is more of a communication function, not necessarily the process of marketing, and that is, again, the inception of the idea all the way through customer satisfaction. If you look at it that way, holistic, then we have different, customers in our ecosystem that we help to drive in order to get those things back.
Sure, and I appreciate that. I love the notion of looking at it holistically and aligning. But let's drill into something very specific, though. I do believe with the clients that we work with, I've been fortunate to work with mid-market enterprise clients for the past decade plus, the fact that they are not respected as much as they should be. Where sales are the folks that are bringing in the money, and engineers are the folks that are building the great products. And we're just kind of pushed into a corner and said, go make something happen. But yet, it's changed because now the buyer has control.
Well, you got to remember the chief marketing officer has only been around for about 17 years in terms of the title.
Sure.
And not all of them had seats at the table, nor does a lot of sales officers, quite frankly, had seats at the table. It's only been in the last 10 years that you've seen chief marketing officers rise to the level at the table. And it's been a little tougher in the B2B. It was much more seen, I think, in the consumer B2C side than it was in the B2B side. And I think because B2B was a little bit more quieter, I think a lot more B2B people came up through the ranks and didn't necessarily come through marketing. So they didn't have the training that I think a lot of other marketers typically had in the consumer side. And now we're seeing that being applied more on the B2B side. Now, I'm a B2B marketer at heart, always have been. That's where I like to strive. That's where I play best, although I've had to do the consumer side.
So you're well-rounded in this.
I try to. Well, I try to be. I don't know if I'm well-rounded or not. I'm well-rounded in size, but I don't know if in terms of intellectual capability. But I think the other thing is, I don't think marketers have done a good job in claiming the space. Quite
so
frankly.
what can we do? What can we do to claim the space? What can we do to prove our value?
Deliver, first of
okay.
all. If you deliver and then show people, but also implement. And I think more and more marketers, and I've seen it a lot more in the last 5-6 years, where they've taken control of the process. And when you start to do that and realize, look, you don't just hand us the products that come out of product development or out of the business units themselves. You have to, and you can't just call them XI3 or whatever the doggone name is. You have to have some strategy behind this kind of activity. You want to leverage those investments. And I think marketing's been doing more and more of that, but it's been taking a long time. And if you look in B2B marketing, it's been slow to develop.
Yep. And what about the notion of in terms of delivery, but what can we do to prove our value? I mean, is it measuring all the way through to sale? I mean, what do we?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, typically, if you want to look at and see how people are measured, usually they're measured in the following. I think most CMOs are on increase in sales, increase in profitability. So that margin is pretty important, and a lot of marketers don't take control over that. That was one of the key things I did, was saying, look, we're going to hit at some target margins. Increase in customer satisfaction is going to be, and then the overall growth of the business. I think those are the key ones. And sometimes we're measured on how we get along with others.
Sure.
And when I talk about increase of growth of the business, I'm really talking about increase of brand value. And so in the last ones, whether we get along with the others in the C-suite, which I really didn't care about, quite frankly. But those four things are the most important: increase in revenue, increase in margin, customer satisfaction, and an increase in brand value. And you can measure those things, and they should be measured, and you should be held accountable for that.
So 2 questions then. How are marketers measuring their increase in sales? Are they able to actually? Yeah.
No, they're not. They sit back, and most marketers, quite frankly, have been designing pretty campaigns
Yep.
and been the chief advertising officer. I think those days are dead.
Yep.
I've been very vocal about that over the last number of years. That most CMOs are now starting to come from the business. So you have to deliver real tangible benefit. It can't be just designing a beautiful television campaign and putting it together, or ad campaign that goes in magazines or online, digital now. And
The advertising mindset.
yeah, and I think
Yep.
that's where most people came from
Yep.
the marketing side. And I
Yep.
think that's where most C-suites put most marketers in. Not all of them. The
Yep.
smart C-suites are adopting this in a more holistic approach and saying, look, we can extract more margin if we do this. We can extract more revenue. We can force our channels to give up some of their margin because we're going to be providing these kinds of things down, and we can control the brand promise, which increases the brand value.
Yep. And so are you seeing a rise in the notion of the title or job function of revenue marketer? I mean, is this something that is beginning to become on the radar?
You've always had. I mean, I've always been a member of Sales and Marketing Executives International since I was a young lad. So, I mean, there's always been sales and marketing executives. And you typically have seen that in B2B side of the business, and they've typically grown from the smaller to mid-market companies. And then they eventually grow up and say, no, we need to separate sales from marketing. My belief is, when I was even at Kodak in a Fortune 100 company,
Sure.
I believe they should be two in the box. And what I meant by that is that I reached out to the chief sales officer and said, we should share the same floor. Our people should go to the same staff meetings. You should make a decision without me. I should make it without you in terms of input. And we should align. And if anyone should be aligned in the C-suite, it ought to be the two of us.
You got it. Let's dig on that for a second, because I think
Not everybody looks at it like that.
well, and I think it's one of the most important things that's happening in those organizations that are actually doing it well.
We're butting and coach, so now
Yeah,
we're
why
getting-
not? I'm
we're
maybe
getting
take this
mean
up.
now. It's
Okay,
getting
yeah,
down to
let's
this.
roll up
This
some
is
sleeves
good.
a little
This
bit. I
is
like
really
this.
good, yeah.
But are large organizations able to align sales and marketing? And if so, what are they doing to do that? And maybe tell a little
Yeah, you just
example of
have
what
to
you're
make
doing.
an agreement to do that and do it. I mean, get off your ass and make it happen. Of course you can do that. Now, typically you do see some rivalries in the C-suite. That's part of the game. I mean, there's a lot of egos that are sitting there, a lot of people peeing on the ground.
You said it, ego. There you go.
Yeah,
That's
you
one
know,
of the
and
biggest challenges, I think, to
yeah.
get around, right? Is
Well,
ego.
it's always an issue out there. Look, we were baked in whenever we were in kindergarten. I think was the book. That's what we're going to be. But I think it's a little bit more towards junior high. But we're baked in, and there is some of those. Whatever you see played out in the playground, you see played out in the C-suite. And if you've got a mature, well-balanced team, you typically don't see those games.
Sure.
But you do see those games. I've, bought and sold, a couple hundred companies, so I actually have seen those games played out a lot. And I still see them with clients and other people, and I still see them as host of the show. You see those things all the time, one group not getting along with the other. But in highly effective companies, you don't have that. They don't have time for it.
They don't permit it.
Yeah, well,
They don't allow it.
it's just not part of the culture, and if which is really a big important thing, and not just the culture, but the operating policies of the company, of the unwritten code that you have.
Sure.
But you don't always have that. You have some people jockeying for position. You have some people looking to take over the boss's job. So you got all those kind of things, trying to look good to the board. You have a lot of things that mix into that,
Okay.
and it just depends on what they're trying to do and get and drive.
So let's move into the notion of alignments. Let's peel that back a little further. Those companies are actually doing it well. They've aligned sales and marketing. What are these organizations doing to truly understand the core insights of what their customers want, need, and desire? Like, how are you getting to that?
Well,
that
they should
core
be listening.
need?
I think that's one of it's interesting. I'm going to these conventions and meetings now, speaking and doing some coverage, and I hear two things. One, we're listening. what the hell were you doing before? You should have been listening before.
Yep.
And now everybody's talking like now we're paying attention. Well, and I think that's a big case. I think social media has brought a lot of changes that way in terms of the fact that we force people to do business with 800 numbers that some sadistic bastard put together. That, press 1 for this, 2 for this.
Yep.
I was on an airline last night trying to get through to a real person, to get because I couldn't book it online. So somebody did that. And so finally they're starting to listen, in terms of pay attention. So I think that's part of it. So I think social media has forced us to have to listen because people have a voice now that they didn't
have control.
a voice. They've always had
But
control.
they have much more control than they have in the past.
Well, I think they've always had control. You could always say, no, I'm not going to do business with you, and walk off and go do business with somebody else. Now, people didn't always do that, or they did, but they just didn't get hurt. Now they get hurt, and I think that's a big difference. And I think the second thing I'm hearing as well is that people are starting to talk about, it's all about relationships. And I'm going like, when did it ever stop?
Where did that
It's always been about relationship and your community and how you get along with people and how you interact and the way in which you're treated. I mean, those are always been a part of the way in which, especially I think more so in B2B than it is in the consumer side.
Let's talk about listening. You brought up listening as a point. And I think that is very apropos to the B2B marketer out there. How do we listen? Because I think there's really two ways you can. Explicit information conversations or through data, an explosion of data. So how do you bring those sources together to make it work?
Big data, that's another whole topic we can probably go off on. The data.
You're not a big data fan, Jeff?
I'm always a big data fan. I'm a data fan. Okay. Data fan. But everybody's talking about like it's some new thing. Like what it wasn't there before. You didn't have access to it before. You just didn't go looking before. So now it's about what systems do you use to go looking. It's always been there. I truly believe, and I've written about this in my book, and I've talked about it before, I think that you should get out and go do things. So when we were selling printers, all right, inkjet printers at Kodak, I used to go to stores and put on a blue shirt at Best Buy and work in the store, because I wanted to see how my competitor was selling against me, because that's what HP did as well.
Sure.
Big Ink, they would sell the same way, and they go through these blue shirters and sell the product. And I wanted to see what customers had to say. So I went to Staples and would see what they do at Staples. And I'd get my buddy at Office Max was another one where they'd let me go in and put on a shirt, and I'd just be the guy at the inkjet counter.
I love it. So my big question there is, how many printers did you actually sell?
I sold a lot, baby. I'm really good at it. I was really good about selling printers, but I'm really good at selling anything. I like selling. So if I believe in the product, I like to sell it. So I believed in the product. But but I think leaders should do more of that stuff. I mean, even when I used to work with a label company, I used to give all the executives, phone calls to call customers about, how was our order? What was it like? Because I wanted people to actually, go through the process and see what it was like from a customer's perspective. I mean, actually, you made them place orders the way a customers would do so they could get that experience. I
mean, but isn't that a fairly big mindset shift? I mean, what you're talking about is empathy, is getting out there and being empathetic to your customers and the people who buy from you, as opposed to the advertorial mindset that we just aforementioned around, this is what we want you to know of our products and services.
I don't get it. Seriously.
But do you see it, though? I mean, do you see?
You see it all the time. I mean, so my father-in-law once asked me, says, how do you go from the company you were doing to, a $17 billion company? I said, well, take away the zeros and treat and do things as though you were back in, I say, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where I'm from. And so that's the way I typically looked at things. I always look at it that way. And so take away all that stuff. You're just selling this. You're still selling one-to-one. Now, I might be selling to millions or trillions or billions or whatever it might be. But in the essence, that's really what it is you're selling one-to-one. So how do I do that, and then how do I scale that? It's a different question. But I really want to understand why you're buying. What's my unique selling proposition? It gets right down to the basics. And to me, I don't think you can make that difficult.
So let me hit on that then. So what are the most critical behaviors or skills of the modern-day B2B marketer? Empathy being, obviously front and foremost. What other pieces would you be looking for if you're hiring, a CMO, a VP, of a B2B marketing organization? What has to be there? So
I would want them to, beyond the basic skills of marketing, I certainly want to know how they're going to be able to handle the digital side, because without digital now, I mean, it's just a different game. And I also want to know more about content marketing. I think content marketing is pretty massive. I don't know we know how to monetize it yet, but content marketing is a big part of how we engage in the story, and what's the story, and then what's the essence of our brand, and understanding those kinds of things. But then the tool sets that you be able to do that, so you understand exactly what these things are, that you actually, you have a flippant Twitter account. You might not have to use it, but you know how it works.
Sure.
You know? I mean, you're not using it every day, but I want you to understand how those things work. And if you don't understand that, you're probably not cut out for today's business.
And how are you judging their success? What are you looking for? Is it those 4 criteria you mentioned?
Yeah, those
earlier?
4 criteria. I mean, I call those mutual conditions of satisfaction. I mean, you know, it gets down to executives. That's what they should be doing. What are my promises to the organization? You know, it's an important thing. You know, I remember the president of Bloomberg recently writing to me and said, Jeff, you're seeing, 40 times more than anyone else online. You know, these numbers are coming through every day. You're getting these kinds of numbers, and your competitors like Neil Cavuto and others are getting these. And they, why? I said, because I'm doing my job. And that's how I wrote him back. Like, that's all you need to know. And so now if you wanted me to explain, but
yes.
In essence, that's what we were trying to do. So it really gets down to conditions of satisfaction. What are the conditions of satisfaction you're trying to drive? So when I would sit down with my CEO, I'd want to know what 4 or 5 promises. I just gave you the 5 a few minutes ago. Those were the 5 promises that I had to deliver on. And I weighted 4 of those more importantly than the other one. Although, I got dinged on the other one too, because I didn't always play in the sandbox. So
sure, fair enough. And I'm sure that has served you well. And
it served me well. In some cases it did serve me well. In other cases it didn't. I mean, because those things also affect your bonus and everything else. So you just have to, decide if that's what you want to do or not.
And I think of those 4 criteria you mentioned, one stuck out to me as being softer than the others, being more qualitative than quantitative. It's the brand value.
Brand value.
Yeah. So talk to me about that, because that's something as a digital marketer that doesn't necessarily resonate with a lot of the folks who hail from driving revenue, driving engagement.
You can judge that by, you could put a couple of different things. Did I keep my customers? Did I increase the amount of dollars from that customer base,
Sure.
That I already
Lifetime
had?
value?
Yeah, and I mean, those are things. And then I could do a quantitative study in terms of understanding that, you thought of us this way. At the end of the year, we go back to those same people. How did you think of us in terms of our customer base? Did we do better than we did before? And if you can come to those kinds of things, then obviously it's a lot better. And so that's how you do it. You got to agree to what those criteria
sure.
are before you get started with it, or it's going to be a really elusive kind of thing. To me, I think the most important one that I've always liked is the margin question, because you can
net margin on product or
on everything, on services, product, or whatever you're driving in terms of the service, the things you sell. But if I can affect margin, I can really add more to the bottom line, and so I can always increase sales. I think that's a net thing you can always do. But that margin, I think, is a really important kind of thing, and I don't think enough business people look at that. And that's where a marketer becomes a real business person, is when they're looking at margin and looking at what we can do to impact that, which is the bottom line. And the CFO is happy, CEO's happy, the board's happy, shareholders are happy, everybody gets to be pretty happy.
I love that. I mean, I think that's a huge topic that most marketers aren't talking about that they should be. Can you give a tangible example of how you were able to increase net margin with any of the companies?
Yeah, I mean, a good example was that we were selling inkjet printers, and we looked at NRR, which is net realized rate. So there's a game that's played with retailers in terms of, how you sell your product into the channel, and you have a certain rate for that product. And so based on the services that you provide to them on a 2nd tier or 3rd tier level, then you can up or discount that rate. And our teams, typically sales teams, like to sell at the lowest rate.
Sure.
And so what we had to do is set a higher rate and say we're not going below that, and drive the sales teams. And in some cases, I would sit down with the sales leader and say, get rid of that guy, because he's selling below the rate, and we've got to sell at this rate. And you have to convince them that this can be done and how you do it. But, taking it from, say, a 17% net realized rate to a 21% net realized rate, when you're talking about $1 billion worth of product, it's huge. It's huge.
Yep.
And that's, hundreds of millions of dollars that you can add to the bottom line.
I love it. If you had to give advice to the modern B2B marketer, what would you want to leave them with? What are the top 2 or 3 things that should be on their radar that they absolutely must be doing strategically or tactically within their organizations?
Well, I think it's always about the basics. So the 3 things that we kind of covered a little bit certainly drive to the promises. So what are your key promises?
What are your key promises?
In terms of, I think that's the most important thing. So you really keep your eye on the ball, because we get distracted a lot. And it's important for us to be able to also be nimble. Because it's always amazing, because I always remember about the 3rd week of January, and January 1 was our budget date. And about the 3rd week of January, I'd think, there's this new campaign. We should do something that. Let's do that. It's $20,000, it's $30,000, whatever. Maybe it's $1 million, whatever it is. And I would go to the team and say, we really need to put this in. And they would go, well, it's not in the budget. It's January the 22nd. You know, be a little bit more nimble. You can't tell me that we're 3 weeks into the budget and we don't have $1 to spend on something new. Well, find it. Then go find it, kill something else if that's the case, because this, I think, is a higher priority. So that's the other piece. And then it gets back to the listening, I think, in terms of that, what are your customers saying, how to reach them, the way in which to reach them, and then build that relationship. And it's really that simple. I think you're going to see more and more brands start to focus in on that community, taking care and nurturing that community, and really doing something. It's like this morning I typically fly one airline, United, because they're my sponsor on the TV show. I love them, and I couldn't fly them because the flight got canceled, which is the act of God. It was the weather.
We're not going to blame it on them.
No. Well, I mean, sometimes it happens.
Right,
I mean, you can't make it that many moving parts. It can't all work that great, but by and large, they're great, and I love them. And I had to take another airline, and it's interesting because I am of certain status for life on that airline as well. But yet I haven't flown them in 3 years. And I fly hundreds of thousands of miles, yet they've never come back to me and asked me why. You would imagine that if I flew, I've got the George Clooney card right here.
Yep.
The black George Clooney card. I'll pull it out so everybody can see it. That
Let's
everybody has.
Look at this beauty.
Yeah, that's it right
is.
there. Don't show the number because they'll zoom in on it. But that's the card, and I have an equal card of that on another airline, which I haven't flown this airline in years.
Yep.
And you would think when I stopped flying them, they would have picked up the phone as a relationship and known that I'm in the top 1/2 of 1% in flying public in the world. That's a pretty good margin.
Yep.
And yet you never hear from them. Yeah. So I think companies need to spend more time with that. And I think you'll see companies realize that value around that community or that customer is so intense and so great. We got to spend more time keeping and nurturing them.
I love it. I was almost going to let you go, but you hit on something that is, I think, unbelievably important to what we're seeing in the market today. You mentioned the word nimbleness. So I understand the notion of promises, I understand the notion of empathy and understanding who your customers are. But how do very large organizations, Fortune 100, 500, 1,000 companies, shift the mindset from procurement-driven efficiencies to being more nimble and connecting with their customers? Because I think you nailed it. Those companies that can do that this day and age are going to win. But what do we need to do transaction within these organizations to be more nimble?
Focus on the promise. If you're focused on the promise, then you'll do everything and you'll put the filters on to do nothing but get that done.
Okay.
And so you'll still have policies and procedures. You got to buy certain ways and so forth. Then the other thing I always do is ask why. Everybody says, well, we always do it this way. Well, why? Why? Can we do it better? Can we do it faster? Can we do it with less people? Because again, I'm trying to deliver to that margin. I'm trying to deliver to those promises. And so, I've always found out that, you can always do it differently. It doesn't mean it's right, doesn't mean it's the best, or you just do it differently. So that's how you be nimble, and you learn, sometimes it goes down and sometimes it goes up, and you'll figure it out. So.
Well, you hit on something that I think is apropos, which is we're very risk averse in B2B, right? People don't want to change,
I think
right?
most people.
But you aren't, right? You're an entrepreneur. You risk. You get out there. You do things. But I think that's a challenge within large organizations, is not wanting to do something new because the risk that is associated with that change.
Well, here's the biggest advice I got to give. In marketing, no one's going to die. You make a mistake. I mean, you might get fired or something like that, although it's rare,
Sure.
You get fired, and if you're a good marketer, you're going to find a new place anyway, so I've never been worried about that. But, I think if you're doing your job and you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, there's no risk. I mean, if I go sit down with the chairman and CEO and I say, hey, here's what we're working out, these are my 5 promises, this is what I'm going to do, and these are the things I'm going to do inside of it, where's the risk?
Yep.
There is no risk because I'm doing the job that he or she said, yes, that's what I want you to do. So you're delivering on that. How can you get in trouble for delivering on that? And so it's about making those statements, and most people don't want to do that. And that's a tough thing. That's a business decision, and that's what leaders do.
Yep.
Every single day we got to make choices, and so that's what you should go in understanding. That's what you should do.
I love it. And there you have it. Jeff Hayzlett, host, not co-host, but host and CEO of the C-Suite. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
That was awesome.